All right, the argument essay. We save this for last, at least in our school, because it is the essay where you have the least support, the fewest materials with which to construct your essay. It all has to come from your mind. The good news is you use basically the same structure we have been abiding by the entire school year, the same essay structure. But in this, we're going to talk about ways to get evidence, ways to the slight differences between the argument essay and the synth essay. So let's get into it. The question on the Lang test, at least, will always have this type of wording. There will be an introduction, some background for the topic, and then they will say, write an essay that argues your position on specific subject from the introduction. So for example, from 2018, this was the argument question. In her book, Gift from the Sea, author and aviator Anne Moore Lindbergh writes, we tend not to choose the unknown, which might be a shock or disappointment, or simply a little difficult to cope with. And yet it is the unknown, with all its disappointments and surprises, that is the most enriching. Write an essay that argues your position on the value of exploring the unknown. An essay that argues your position on the value of exploring the unknown. And the value part, when I've given this in the past, has been something that students have screwed up, I guess, for lack of a better phrase. You got to make sure you read the prompt and answer the question. So in an instance of that, it is asking, what is the value of exploring the unknown? And you could take a number of stances. You could say there is lots of value to exploring the unknown, or you could say Anne Moore Lindbergh is wrong. There is no value to exploring the unknown. But if you're not talking about value and what is gained or lost in exploring the unknown, you're not responding to the topic, to the question that's being asked. You need to craft a thesis and plan which you will use as evidence to support this thesis. This is the biggest difference from the synth problems. You are providing the evidence. They don't give you any sources to use. Everything has to come from your mind. So the planning portion, where you'd normally be reading a rhetorical piece for the rhetorical analysis essay, or where you'd be reading the sources for the synth essay, you have to devote, I'd say probably 10 minutes, 10 minutes, I'd say, is a reasonable amount of time, figuring out what sources you're going to use to support your thesis. So quickly, let's look at the rubric for this test. Eventually it'll load. As we wait for it to load, I'll tell you what you're going to see. It looks almost identical to the synth rubric. The only thing that's not there is going to be the language about the amount of sources that you use, because they don't provide you with any sources for this. You have to come up with them yourself. But the whole concept of crafting a defensible thesis is going to be there. And then for evidence and commentary, to get full marks, you have to consistently and persuasively provide evidence and establish a line of reasoning explaining how it proves your thesis. Why is it not loading? Well, all right, here we go, fam. Defensible thesis that responds to the prompt. Provide specific evidence to support all claims in a line of reasoning, and consistently explain how the evidence supports a line of reasoning. Uniformly offer evidence to support claims. Focus on the importance of specific details to build the argument, organizing and supporting an argument as a line of reasoning composed of multiple supporting claims, each with adequate evidence that is clearly explained. So they're going to really, it's all about that structure that we've been using. And just like with the other essays, I advise that you write a 4-paragraph essay, one with an intro. One paragraph is the intro that ends with the thesis. And your thesis, I advise you having 2 claims. And then you develop those 2 claims into 2 body paragraphs. Each body paragraph, I advise you to have 2 pieces of evidence that you develop with a line of reasoning. We'll go over that a little more. We'll also talk about sophistication, but the sophistication, last I checked, is identical to synthesis. You can craft it by either being a really good writer for 3 and 4, or by being a nuanced writer. So one that which I think is much easier to teach, nuance and concession and refutation. Telling somebody to employ a style that is consistently vivid and persuasive, well, that is very subjective, and I just don't see a way to effectively teach that to a whole group of students. So that's why I don't talk about that much. As you practice and as you read widely and imitate it and mimic it, I've seen students develop as a writer and become stronger, but you don't want to bank on getting 3 or 4. But you can bank on trying to write a nuanced argument that acknowledges its limitations. All right, so we have now gone over the rubric. We'll move forward. We've talked about what a line of reasoning is before, but yeah, that's just from I've copied a lot of this from the synth essay. Let's see. All right, I'm going to get rid of this. Ignore, well, yay. So remember when we talked about a qualified argument, qualifying, it's the difference between saying college is not worth it, which is not qualified at all. It's absolute, there's no wiggle room. Qualifying, I would say, for most American teens, or for American teens who have to rely on loans to pay for tuition, college is not worth it. That's very qualified. And you can definitely use qualified stances on these argument questions. However, the prompts that they give you don't always deal with the type of complex issues you see in a synth prompt. So you don't need to feel obligated to always try to attempt a qualified thesis. Because if you do provide a qualified thesis, you need to be prepared to consistently develop it and explain it. So you don't go into it thinking that you have to write a qualified thesis. That's what I'm trying to say. Because the essay that I'm going to use as our model in this is not, they don't qualify. They respond. They say, yes, Anmar Lindbergh is absolutely correct. And they don't try to not do any concession or refutation in it. So you can get, and the essay got full marks. So you don't have to feel like you have to do that. If you don't, but if you're feeling it, if in your opinion you have a nuanced take on it, then by all means, if you have the evidence to support it and you can articulate it in your line of reasoning, by all means go for it. Okay, so as I've already said, you should try to incorporate a healthy amount of concession and refutation into your essay, the same amount as you would in a synth essay. Acknowledging the limitations of your argument is a way to earn the sophistication point, just like on the synth essay. So I've already done an entire video on concession and refutation and where to put it in your essay. You can really embed it throughout. I always try to advise students to try to practice putting it at the end of their body paragraphs, acknowledging points that go against it that are valid while reasserting the general spirit of your claim that you are making. And you can also acknowledge concession and refutation in your intro and your conclusion as well. But do you have to do it? No. But if you can see the complexity of your answer, then definitely feel free to articulate it, because it does make you seem like a more, that you have a larger view of the topic and the issue. Okay, I put this in here to make sure I don't forget about emphasizing this, because if there's one thing I'd say across the board my students personally can improve on, and we can always be conscious of, is making our body paragraphs cohesive and stick together. And transitions between body paragraphs is an easy way of doing that, but also exploring the similarities between the evidence that you use is another way to show this cohesion between the ideas that you provide. I will illustrate that in just a sec with our model essay. So as we've looked at throughout the year, opening paragraph should start out with a hook that doesn't just restate the prompt, give some setup for the context of the essay, and then have a thesis, your stance, and then 2 points that support your position if you're doing a timed write. If you're doing an out-of-class essay, you go for 3 because you have that time. And you're more persuasive if you can write 3 with 2 pieces of evidence within each claim, right? Yes. But when you're writing under the gun of time, you want to make sure you have a complete essay. And that's why I advise 2 body paragraphs, so 2 claims. You have meaningful transitions, a topic or a claim, then evidence or an example, which you have to explain in your own words. So with the argument essay, and even if you're doing an out-of-class argument essay like I'm going to assign to my classes, you're not researching anything. You're not citing anything. You're giving examples that come from your own knowledge, that come from your brain and your expertise. Okay? So hopefully that makes sense, and hopefully I won't get a ton of questions about like, wait, well, how do I do in-text citation? You don't do in-text citations with this. There are none. You're not expected to cite anything but things that you can recall from your mind. And if that seems challenging, that's why we're going to encourage you to try to start practicing and figuring out what you are an expert in and what you know a lot about. Because, and if, yeah, and this is why this is, in my opinion, the most challenging, but it's also the most rewarding for me to read because they're diverse. Like no student comes up with the same evidence and examples. Okay. For a conclusion, I've just kind of copied and pasted exactly what I put for synth. I advise you to look to the future of the issue or situate it in a broader context. Talk about why this topic matters in the broader conversation of our country and our world in 2021. All right? Just don't simply restate your thesis. That's kind of lame, right? Okay, so what can you use for evidence? The more scholarly it is, the better. So we have an acronym for different places you can find, or we categorize different possible sources of evidence. So reading or literature, novels, short stories, nonfiction, entertainment or sports. So documentaries, movies, television shows. Sports, athletes' lives are pretty well documented. And if the story of a specific athlete or a team is relevant to it, then yes, you can use that. History, if you pay attention in history class and you know a lot about American or world history and you have relevant examples that you can provide, by all means, do that. U is for universal truths or religion. Universal truths, that's like truisms about life, I guess. Really, I think the important thing is to think of this one as the religion part. And it's just the R would be tough to find a place to put for the purpose of the acronym. But if you happen to be religious and you know a lot about your holy text of your respective religion, and there are examples from it, from the Bible or the Torah or the Quran, then by all means, those could be used, okay? G is for government and politics. Relevant examples from government and politics that you could use, yeah, go for it. Observations and personal experiences in science. So like I said at the top, the more scholarly, the better. So literature, history, religion, government, politics, science would be considered the more scholarly of them. Entertainment, if you're just citing, Netflix series and your own personal experiences, that's not terribly scholarly. But if your argument is very well articulated, well structured, with concession refutation, you could probably do pretty well. You might not get this, I don't know. Because I mean, in the rubric, they don't say your evidence has to be scholarly in order to get the points. So I don't want you to feel like you can't use, it's really about the quality of how you make your argument. I think it just generally coincides that people who solely use their personal observations and anecdotes as evidence generally don't write very well to begin with, right? Because you're not showing a lot of creativity or ability to pull from different parts of your intellectual experience. But if you're watching this video, it probably doesn't apply to you. Why would you be watching this if you were that uncreative? All right, what was I? Science. Boy, if you could pull scientific examples, that's such a big brain thing. The essay, I keep talking about this essay we're going to read, and it's so good. All right, here we are. We finally made it to it. So this essay responds to the Anne Morrow Lynn prompt, the one about is there value in exploring the unknown. So the link is going to take you to all the free response questions. Like it starts at the top, and then as you go down, the essays get progressively worse. Sample C and the next one, sample G, those both scored full credit, 141. However, in my opinion, sample C is the one to emulate and use as your holy text, as I put it, because it is so well structured and it is so diverse and scholarly in the evidence that it provides. It's so cohesive in the way it ties together the evidence. It's unimpeachable almost in its quality. So what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to take some time to read this essay, and then we will talk about what makes this such a fantastic essay. All right? So I don't want to read it out loud for you. I'm going to stop the video and restart it, and then give you that time to read it. All right, was it a good essay? Yeah, it's a good essay. How can you, I mean, what I love about it, I've already talked at length about it, but I don't think this writer did anything that any of my students are incapable of doing. This student had excellent structure and was able to pull from a variety of their passions, their scholarly knowledge, to construct this essay. And the student didn't do anything fancy or avant-garde that made it so perfect or beautiful. There's nothing unattainable about what it did. It's just a perfect execution of the form. So let's look at the thesis. In this sense, she is absolutely correct. So there's the stance. Anne Morrow is correct. And then the exploration of the unknown has led to unprecedented scientific achievement, cultural development, and personal developments alike. So the stance is that Anne Morrow, she is correct, and scientific development, cultural development, and personal development alike. So this student was ambitious enough to go for 3 claims. Now I tell you to only go for 2. The student chose to go for 3. And it defines them as scientific, cultural, and personal development. And when you read that, you're expecting to see anecdotal, like their own personal experience, but they're going to hit us with literary examples, as we're going to see. Okay. So what I'd like to encourage you, if you feel comfortable doing this, is to, if you can respond to a prompt and craft a thesis that takes a stance and then uses categories to categorize your claims, that will make it easier for you to find multiple historical examples to support your claim, multiple literary examples, or multiple scientific examples to support it, right? As the student does. So in the essay for scientific development, JFK's leading the exploration into outer space. Obviously, the moon landing was successful, and the subsequent technological development benefited all aspects of society. Billions were allocated in research funding, and as a result, humanity expanded its sphere of knowledge greatly. Yet, this is not a recent phenomenon. So, real quick, this is describing, explaining how it created development, or how exploration into the unknown is good and productive for society. President John F. Kennedy is famously quoted as saying the U.S. would land on the moon, quote, not because it is easy, but it's because it is hard. They chose to provide that quote because they knew it by heart. If you don't know a quote by heart, don't worry about it. They could have just said JFK in the 60s led in the early 60s led NASA's charge to land on the moon and beat the Russians, right? You have to just set up your evidence, and then you have to explain how it proves your thesis. Then they shift. Yet this is not a recent phenomenon. A good transition mid-paragraph. One of the most famous scientists in history, Galileo, chose to explore and challenge commonly held truth. He was ridiculed for claiming the earth revolved around the sun. Yet it was his desire to enter into the unfamiliar that led to scientific advances by the U.S. under Kennedy so many years later. So this student explained the connection between Galileo's exploration into the unknown and how it contributed to Kennedy, who was previously mentioned. So there's cohesion within this body paragraph. Then, look at this. Then they just start firing off science names, scientists throughout the history. Kepler, Boyle, Tyson, Hawking, Charles, Gauss, and more made their names by engaging with the unknown, and humanity will forever be indebted to them for their tenacity. All right, maybe I'm exaggerating saying that any student is capable of doing that. I mean, this kid clearly is has their nose in a book pretty often. But the structure is eminently attainable, and the student not only provides the evidence, but then explains how it creates advances and how that proves the thesis that pushing into the unknown is a good thing. Okay, then they move on to music, but they don't completely discard science. Yet this trend is not limited to the realm of science. Good transition. There's the music, known of the many era of music from medieval to classical romantic. Then we get Bach and how he created his own era of music, the chamber orchestra. Like scientists, so creating cohesion between the paragraphs, musicians are known for being barrier breakers. Listen to Shostakovich's 12th string quartet. Demonstrate how musicians continuing to explore the limitless possibilities of sound. And now, the line of reasoning. By breaking the constraints of cultural norms and exploring the unknown, composers have brought lasting cultural development to fruition. So I guess one thing you'll notice is that the amount of the amount of the own line of reasoning is perhaps a touch briefer than you see in the synth essays, because you have to spend some time explaining your evidence. Okay. I mean, obviously this kid probably could teach the class better than I could, but you'll notice the student does spend a good amount of time explaining his or her evidence that she is providing for us, but always make sure to explain how it proves her thesis. Makes it cohesive. It's just, what can you say? And then, not even done. Finally, an exploration of the familiar is a powerful tool of personal development in addition to the scientific and cultural benefits. So a good enough transition, acknowledging what has come before it. If you cut up these body paragraphs, you'd easily be able to put them in the correct order, just looking at the language within them. It references prior paragraphs. And then we get the transcendentalist Henry David Thoreau, and like Bach and Shostakovich, Thoreau helped establish a new genre in his craft. Oh, yeah. All right. Yeah, dock the sophistication point is instead of in. Come on, kid. Get it together. No. Thoreau, along with create transition now studied by millions. While his exploration of new ideas is certainly notable, it is the content of his writing that's most important in the context of the theme of unknown. Reading Walden gives a clear impression of Thoreau as a dynamic character, one who develops and alters himself thanks to the knowledge he obtains. It is clear. So I think it is right here that we really start seeing that line of reasoning. There's a ton of setup for it, but I'd say it's worth the payoff because everything it's explaining is Walden and Thoreau's creation of it was nothing but an exploration, a literary exploration of the unknown. So then even has time to write an okay conclusion. I'm not sure there's anything perhaps added to it. You'll notice that there is no, there's no concession and refutation. They never try to acknowledge the limitations of their argument. The writer doesn't. And that's because I don't think the writer really saw any limitations to their argument and thus didn't see fit to do that. And the writing is so vivid, the amount of evidence is so persuasive that, I mean, it overwhelms you to where how could you not give it full points? So a good example of how you don't have to feel bound by to always qualify, to always do concession and refutation. But if you see it within your argument, definitely take the time to do that. All right. So I think that's the last slide I have. I think I'll probably make a few more videos modeling different styles or different ways to write an argument essay, different ways to plan it, what good argument essays look like. But really what I want to impart to you is the acronym REHUGOS. Maybe internalize that, memorize it, because you'll need that to help brainstorm But then just think of it as a synth essay where you are providing the sources. No one's providing the sources for you. And that's what adds to the complexity of it and the challenge of it. And guess what? They save it for last. It's question 3. So if you do them in order, it'll be the last essay you're writing. And that seems particularly sadistic, in my opinion, on College Board's part. However, on test day, you get to answer them in whatever order you choose. So if you want to get it over with, if you see the prompt and you're like, all right, I got a good idea for this, I would advise you to do it first because, like I said, it requires the most brain power. And if you save it for the end, your brain power might be faltering a little bit, right? Okay, that's it for now. Thank you for watching. Bye.